Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Wild and Live. It's Friday, so it's the weekend. Yes. Where are you guys going this weekend? Nowhere? Neither am I. I thought I'd stay in this weekend. Thanks for joining us. We are here for another episode. Wild and Live. What's the show about? So, for those of you that are new to the show, we are. Oh, hang on a second. Just a second. What's going on here? Well, I know you can hear me because I've got my YouTube page open, so which is great. What's the show about? For those of you that are new to Wild and Live, well, we're talking about animals from around the world, bringing you some of the coolest facts from the animal kingdom, and we're doing that with the help of some pretty awesome experts. So that's filmmakers, conservationists, and biologists from around the planet. If you're new to this channel, please remember there's a button down there. Subscribe, smash that subscribe button, and why not go ahead and share this page with someone who you think would be interested in finding out some cool animal facts. Today, let's get into it. We're going to be joined by a mammal specialist and pine marten enthusiast, Stuart Edmunds. Are you wild and live?
I am very much wild and alive. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, we can. Thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you. Before we get started, actually, let me make sure I've got all my questions. There we go. A long list of questions for you. I hope you're ready.
Yeah, of course, always ready.
Brilliant. We're here today to talk about pine martens, an animal that you're very, very passionate about. First question for you. I've heard that pine martens are sometimes referred to as Mother Nature's cutest assassins. Why do you think they've earned that reputation?
I think that's a great description of a pine marten because they are incredibly cute-looking animals with the soft brown fur and the cute black eyes. But they're very adapted to hunting, so they are. We'll get onto the diets a bit later, but they are incredibly fast, so that they can basically accelerate as fast as any of the prey items they might be going for. So they really are great, and it's quite a powerful bite. So when they go for the kill, it's just a quick bite to the back of their head of whatever that is they're hunting, and it's all over in a matter of seconds.
Super sharp teeth, very agile animals, and really soft fur. They look like they would, that they couldn't hurt a fly.
That's right, but it surprises a lot of people. But the stamina of these creatures is pretty impressive. If they're after a meal, they continue it, and that's very much a feature of the family of mammals that they're from. That they're known as tenacious animals. They're not give up the fight too easily.
Yeah, well, we'll get onto that a little bit later. Pine martens are mammals. They're part of the mustelid family, so they're part of the weasel family. As we've already said, they are beautiful-looking creatures. So let's start with that. Let's start with what they look like. Can you give us a description of what a pine marten looks like and what it is?
I can, but there's no easier way to describe something than with a physical prop. So what I'd like to do now is introduce you to Chris Marten. This is my marten mascot. Chris is a great way of describing what martens are like, but it's got some of the key features. Martens are much bigger than people realise. That we're talking about an animal about the size of a domestic house cat. Chris is a bit smaller than that. We've got like a baby pine marten in Chris, but they're easily distinguished by their bushy tail and the throat bib. So the great thing is about having Chris as a prop is that it really clearly demonstrates this throat bib, and that's really a key distinguishing feature of the pine marten.
And in the pine marten, that bib is it white or is it more of a yellow-orange kind of colour?
So they're usually slightly off-white, so we're talking cream, but they're often slightly yellowy, particularly during the summer when they've got their summer pelage.
And how big do they get, Stuart? What's kind of like the maximum size of an adult, a fully grown pine marten?
So a big male is going to be anything up to about 80 to 90 centimetres. So,
oh wow, so almost a metre in length.
So from tip of the nose to the tip of the tail. So yeah, much bigger than people realise.
Yeah, that's massive. See, because when you think of an animal that's related to other weasels, you think of small things. Well, like common weasels are tiny. So you've got a common weasel or a lesser weasel? Am I getting my names mixed up?
Or a least weasel.
The least weasel, that's right. Super tiny to almost a meter in length. That's really, really impressive.
So these are very much scaled up members of the mustelid family. So we've got the smaller ones, as you mentioned. We've got in the UK, we've got weasels, they're being the smallest, then the stoats, which they often get confused. That people don't realise the stoat's slightly bigger than a weasel.
Yeah.
Then you're going up to the polecats, and then the pine martens are like next in that hierarchy of size.
Now, you mentioned polecats. I understand that the domesticated versions of polecats are ferrets, if I've done my research correctly. These group of animals are super slinky. Anybody that owns a ferret will know how agile they are, and I suppose that's kind of makes their ability to move so smoothly, almost like a snake, makes them really fun to handle. Where does that agility come into play when we look at pine martens in the wild?
Well, the pine martens, although they're related to polecats, they're very much adapted to an arboreal or a kind of forest habitat. So these are animals that are perfectly adapted to being able to spend time up in trees. Their whole physiology is adapted to allow them to hunt things up in the treetops, and also they create their dens or nests up in those trees too. But that's also helped by obviously the long bushy tail, as Chris so nicely demonstrated.
Chris
that's
Marten,
great.
Pine marten.
Yes, that's a great way of balancing as they're running through the trees, and of course they've also got adapted claws, which we can get onto in a minute.
Yeah, for sure. Here's probably a stunning admission from myself. I'm going to switch. There we go. Here I am to admit to all of those of you watching. I always thought, Stuart, that when I first heard the name Pine Marten, that's about 10 years ago, and someone said, "Oh, we're going to go film some pine martens." I think it was for Springwatch. It was Martin Hughes Games, and he was talking about pine martens. I assumed that he was talking about birds. Yes, I can literally hear every biologist sighing, slapping a hand to the face. Pine martens are obviously not birds, they're mammals. I don't know what, I think I got confused between, I'd heard of house martens before, which are birds. So, yeah, a bit of a confusion from me. But where does the name pine marten come from?
It's don't worry, it's not just you, Patrick. It's a common mistake, and
Yes! I knew I wasn't alone. I couldn't be.
But one of the things I found out from going around giving my talks and lectures is, I'd say 40% of the room often assumes that we're talking about house martens.
Oh, really? Interesting. So it's a common thing.
It's quite common, and I think people are aware of the things like the stoats and weasels, but pine martens are quite. They're just not as commonly seen, and of course they weren't around in England, so people obviously don't think about these creatures. Whereas house martens, they're really visible. They're nesting in people's houses and the roof spaces. So that's kind of that association, the word marten. But with pine marten, it's a spelling thing. So with a pine marten, it's a marten with an e rather than a martin with an I, as in the bird, the marten. And
are they called pine martens because they prefer pine trees? That's what I'd assume, but you never know with names.
Well, the name marten basically comes from the Latin, which was martes, and the Latin name is named martes. And the variation of that name across Western Europe and the Latin-based languages, there's always that mar, M-A-R. So in German, you've got like marder, they're called in German. Up in Scandinavia, they call them mard. So that there's that kind of like crossover. But the actual the prefix when you're referring to the pine, that was a way of distinguishing pine martens from their very close relatives, the beech martens, which we also get in Europe. So to add a bit of confusion into things, but as you'll know through biological studies, there's often a bit of confusion. But we've got two types of martens in Europe. We've got the pine marten and the beech marten, but the beech marten is also sometimes known as the stone marten, just to really confuse you.
I'm really confused.
This is often a huge topic of confusion to people. But the easiest way to think of it is that the pine marten was associated with being in northern Europe, where the predominant tree species would have been the conifers, hence the pine, and the beech marten further south into Europe, from France down into Italy and further, and those were associated with like the broadleaf forests or beech forests.
Great. Well, we'll get on to where they live and what type of habitats they like to that they specialise in living in. Here's an interesting fact about pine martens. They are the only mustelid with semi-retractable claws. I wonder, Stuart, if that has an effect on the way that they in the way that they behave.
Yeah, very much so. So what I'd love to be able to do is demonstrate with Chris here the semi-retractable claws, but it's the one feature that Chris sadly doesn't have. But basically, those semi-retractable claws, it's similar to how cats might retract their claws. That's a feature that enables them to climb effortlessly through trees. So that those claws, when they're on ground level, they basically pull those claws in, and when it comes to the climbing, they can push those claws out. They think a bit like Wolverine from the X-Men.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, so that basically push those claws out, and that's it. It also helps them, of course, to grip onto prey. So when they're chasing things through the trees or at ground level, they can pull the prey in using those claws.
I like that reference there to Wolverine. Wolverine, one of my favorite.
It has to be done, yeah. To get a
and you know, as you're saying it seems like it means that they are they more arboreal than the other members of the weasel family?
Yes, definitely. So whereas the polecat would have like filled the niche at ground level as being that kind of mid-sized carnivore, the pine marten was very much adapted to the arboreal lifestyle. So they're dwelling in trees, and they've basically adapted and been here since the end of the last ice age, when straight after the ice age, that's when the forest started to really blossom across the UK. And the same across much of Europe. There's a huge amount of forestry cover, so lots of habitat for pine martens.
I'm just playing a clip, Stuart, from the camera traps that you sent over to me. We can see a pine marten. It's a dark clip. Some really great imagery here. A fun little fact that I found out about you, Stuart. It was you were the one that discovered the first confirmed population of pine martens living in the UK for over 100 years. It also earned you a pretty awesome prize, which involved going to the House of Lords. How did you discover these secretive little animals, and what does it feel like to have your work recognised internationally?
Okay, well, first of all, although I'd love to take credit for it being the UK, it is so it's the first occurrences of them in England. In
England, thank you. Yeah.
Yes. So they've been present in Scotland in quite good numbers for a continuous amount of time, but in England they pretty much got to the point of extinction, if not being completely extinct, and there are very few records. And then in Shropshire itself, through my involvement with the Shropshire Mammal Group, we were looking at people sending records of martens, and so that was really interesting to see that an animal was not supposed to be in Shropshire, people said they were seeing, and it kind of all stemmed from that, to the point that, as you mentioned, after we discovered them in 2015, it was recognised last year through the International Fund for Animal Welfare, and it was a bit of a surprise, to be honest. I'd never anticipated that there'd be that much interest in the discovery, but not just the discovery itself, but there's a huge amount of interest in pine martens. So it was a really, really special day for me to be able to kind of like raise awareness of the animal that I'm so passionate about, but to see that there's already quite a few people out there that are just as passionate as me about them.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at some of these images. It's great to see these animals, acting as they would do in their natural habitat, the secret window into their lives. And so you're saying that you were able to find them because and on the last clip we've just got a pine marten there with something in its mouth. What do pine martens eat?
So that's a clip of a pine marten with what we think is a wood mouse. It's quite common for martens to hunt things. So as I mentioned there, they're adapted for the hunting. So they're opportunists. So if they come across a quick, easy meal, they're going to go for the easy option. They'll only hunt for things when they've really got to expend that energy. So in Shropshire at the moment, I'd say they're eating things like, as I mentioned, they're the wood mice. We've got lots of bank voles that they'll go for as well. They'll also hunt rabbits. But it's not just the animals they're going for. They also that's not even half of their diet. They're also going for small birds every so often where they can find them, but also a lot of herby like vegetation, particularly during the autumn. They'll be eating lots of nuts. We've got loads of bilberries or wimbries that grow across the Shropshire hills, and they'll be going for those as well. It's an easy source of nutrients.
So they do eat berries and nuts as well, not just they won't take live prey items as well.
No, so we refer to pine martens and quite a few of the mustelids as being opportunists rather than complete carnivores. So they have a very mixed diet, and that's totally dependent on what food is available. So they're very adaptable to the food that's there for them.
That sounds like the ideal kind of situation for a small mammal, a small carnivorous mammal like the pine marten. It sounds like that gives them the edge in situations where their preferred diet isn't available. They're not too fussy. They can switch to something else on the menu.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably why they've been doing okay in Shropshire, because the benefit that we've got for martens here is that the conditions aren't quite as bad as you might find up in the Highlands of Scotland, for example, or even further north. We go into mainland Europe, in Scandinavia. Pretty harsh conditions during the winter. They're real like frozen weather, and not a lot of food around for them during the probably 3 or 4 months of the year.
Let's talk about that, Stuart. And what type of environments do they prefer to live in? You mentioned Scotland, you mentioned Shropshire, and you also mentioned changing of the seasons. So what's their distribution like across Europe? Europe, the UK, and then what happens during the winter? Do they hibernate? Do they cache food like squirrels?
They don't generally hibernate, but what they do tend to do when the weather does get colder and wetter, they will spend much more time resting up, so they could easily be spending over half of their time during the winter, which sounds quite nice to me, just relaxing, saving as much energy as they can, but not actually fully hibernating, because they just haven't got the biological makeup to be able to spend weeks without food like other species of animals might do. They can't build up those fat reserves. They've got quite high metabolism, and from their shape as well, that you can see any footage that you may have shown there. They're really quite long, sleek animals, and that isn't great really for, if you imagine freezing cold temperatures up in the far north, where you're talking about -5, -10. That's a lot of surface area to absorb the cold.
Yeah, I was going to say, what a great way to think about it when we think of surface area and being able to maintain heat. If you've got a cup of tea, when it's in your mug, it's nice and warm. But if you were to spread that cup of tea onto a saucer or onto a large plate, all of that hot tea would get cold much quicker than if you kept it in the mug. Is that a good comparison there?
Yeah, I think that's the best way to see it. And because of that, what they'll do is huddle up. They also, for an animal that we're talking about the size of a domestic house cat, they're also quite good at curling themselves up into quite small balls, and they'll actually fit themselves into tree cavities or anywhere out of the way, and they'll fit into holes. We're talking about something about 10 to 12 centimetres across. They'll wedge themselves, and that's how they'd keep warm during the winter.
And let's stay on the topic of winter. Does the snow cover help them in any way, shape, or form, or when the snow comes down, are they in real big trouble?
It will certainly affect their ability to hunt. Obviously, it's much more difficult if they're hunting at ground level for the animals that we've mentioned before.
I've seen clips of them whipping through underground tunnels almost.
Yeah, so they're known for voling, again, particularly where there's much deeper snow cover. They'll actually listen out for voles, and they can dig under the snow level where that vole population is basically tucked away in relative safety as far as it knows, but not where the feisty pine marten is concerned. And they'll sniff out those tunnels, and they can still pick those things off. Whereas you've got other carnivores like foxes that will actually listen out for the voles from above the snow, and they'll dive down and grab the voles like directly from the air. But yeah, pine martens that are a bit very good at saving energy, so they're very intelligent animals.
Great. We're at the 20-minute mark, I know, but I'm really fascinated by what you do, and so I'd like to keep on going a little bit longer. Anybody that's watching, if you have some questions for Stuart, please pop them into the comments box, and hopefully we'll be able to see those comments coming in. Ask your questions. Let's spend another 5 minutes with you, Stuart. I don't want to keep you too long. Let's we mentioned some of the animals that some of the prey that they go after, that they eat. Squirrels are one of those prey items for pine martens. However, I read an article recently that seemed to imply that even though pine martens hunt for squirrels, their return is also linked to a benefit to other squirrel populations. Can you explain to us what's going on there?
Yeah, again, it's another paradox of nature. It does sound like that it just can't possibly make sense. But the dynamic that we've now got in the UK and Ireland is that, of course, we've lost a lot of our red squirrels, which are the native squirrels to the islands, and those have been displaced by the North American grey squirrels, which have been released over the last 120 years, and they've spread pox. They've pretty much wiped out the red squirrel population across huge areas of England, Wales, and they're now getting into Scotland too. But those red squirrels that were still in existence actually evolved alongside pine martens for thousands of years. So they were much more agile. They could outrun pine martens. Much more difficult for martens to get unless the squirrel had some kind of deficiency, or though it was for some reason genetically weaker than others. So then you throw the grey squirrel into the equation. They've displaced the reds, but grey squirrels are slightly more cumbersome when it comes to trying to outrun these things. So
they spend more time on the ground, don't they?
They do, and they actually they out-eat a lot of our other animals. So they find nut caches and they'll eat the food put aside by jays and dormice and things like that. So they end up being quite bulky over here. There's loads of food for them, and because of that, they're actually a bit slower than a red squirrel. So what will happen is you get a pine marten end up in a population or a woodland where there's grey squirrels, and the grey squirrel population is then an easy target for the pine marten. And grey squirrels aren't used to having this terrifying arboreal predator around their woodlands. As soon as they realise that they're in danger, the grey squirrels, it appears, seems to disperse.
Interesting. So one of the ways that we can help our native red squirrel population is by bolstering the pine marten population, one of their predators.
Yes, yeah, and there's more work being done just to see what the impact of pine marten introduction might be having on grey squirrels, but it does vary a lot geographically. So at the moment in Ireland, there's definitely been an impact on grey squirrels from pine martens, and where the grey squirrels have gone, the red squirrels have moved back in, and we've seen that they're breeding much more successfully, and they're much happier, which is obviously makes for a healthier population of reds.
Yeah.
But in Shropshire, to bring it close to the work that I've been doing, there's grey squirrels absolutely everywhere. You've seen the camera trap footage of pine martens. Those pine marten clips of a few seconds each are amongst hundreds and hundreds of hours of grey squirrels. We've got a lot of grey squirrels in Shropshire. And at the moment, I've seen no sign of the pine martens eating the grey squirrels, and I'm still waiting patiently for a pine marten just to pose nicely as that pine marten did with the wood mouse, in front of a camera trap holding a grey squirrel, which would give us unequivocal evidence that they will definitely eat the grey squirrels, but at the moment it's very, very difficult to say.
Yeah, but I suppose that's part of the excitement of tracking animals and finding out all about their lives and what they do. Two questions left from me. I mentioned earlier you're a mammal specialist. You like to look into all the different features of mammals and how they behave. And one of the things that you look at is not just their behavior and their external features, but also the traces they leave behind. Let's put it. You're fascinated
Very polite.
Yeah, you're fascinated by mammal poop. When we look at the scats left over by pine martens, that's what pine marten poop is called, scat. I've heard that it looks a little bit like fox poop, only it has a floral aroma. Have you ever gone around smelling pine marten poop?
Yeah, this isn't really something that anybody should ever admit, but it's not just me, but me and a few geeky friends that are quite keen to find pine marten poo so that we can see what the pine martens are being eaten for a start. So that will give us evidence that they may have been eating grey squirrels. We do have to go out and try and find it, and as you mentioned, that there's a lot of other mammal poo out there. So one of the only ways of determining that it's pine marten is to give it the sniff test, which sounds a little bit gross, and it's not something.
Sounds really gross, Stuart.
Yeah, but of course, what you need to do first of all is make sure that you've got the right things, and you'll be pleased to know I've got some more props, but these are very accurate reproductions, so these aren't the real things.
Okay,
but just to give you an idea, if I hold that up,
yeah.
So this is your typical fox scat.
Now this is a real scat or a recreation?
No. So this is a lovingly recreated fox scat made out of
reproduced fox scat
salt dough, which a friend of mine has been producing. There's quite a demand for these. You'd be surprised to hear. And compare that to a typical pine marten scat. A pine marten scat tends to be quite twisted and almost like in letters. This one looks a bit like an
S or a question mark.
Yeah. So they come in all kinds of like those twisty shapes, but it can be quite easy to confuse those. They don't always look exactly as they might do in the book. So yeah, if you basically give the fox poo a sniff, it's not going to smell very nice, and we're not getting it right up our nose like that or anything. There's nothing weird going on. We're just giving it a quick sniff from a distance. If it smells horrible, it's probably fox or polecat. Pine marten scat smells quite sweet compared to the other scats. It's compared to Parma violet sweets. If you ever tried sweet, so the smell is similar to that, but also to me it smells a little bit like damp hay or silage. Okay. So it's really not a bad smell, and that's how you'd tell the difference. And of course, that's really useful for me to be able to get the bones and prey remains and getting DNA. So it's not just a weird thing that we've got going on in Shropshire. This is a really key way of detecting pine marten scats, so we can determine where they've come from, and we can get those DNA samples from those scats.
Fantastic. Stuart, I think we're almost out of time with you, but I just want to take this time to say a massive thank you. It's been great getting insight into your world, what you do normally outside of this lockdown period. Let's just finish off with talking about your work in Shropshire. Just a couple of lines from you about your passion for wildlife. You're I understand that you're not a trained biologist as such. This was just something you were interested in, and which is, and now you're an expert in the field. Can you tell us about a little bit about kind of your passion for wildlife, and also why you feel so passionately about communicating the wonders of nature to the public, both adults and children?
Yes, yeah. I'll try to sum this up as quickly as possible. But the whole passion that I've now got for wildlife is it's really a lifelong passion. This is something that hooked me when I was a kid, thanks to nature holidays with my family up to Scotland, and that's kind of like continued. And I've always been kind of like a bit of a closeted conservationist, and even when I was doing my degree, which I wanted to get into wildlife filmmaking and things at the time, and then subsequent careers after university, I always had that kind of like underlying passion for the impacts that we might be having on wildlife. And I was always very conscious in employment of the company's impact on the environment as well.
Yeah.
So I decided to really push for this, a career that would allow me to actually raise awareness of that to other people, which I've done through various volunteering projects. So I did a lot of volunteering work and training, just without really getting paid for quite a while, just to try and get this career in conservation going.
So it really started out as just a passion of yours.
Yeah, very much a passion, which was, as I mentioned, the passion then encourages other people, hopefully, to take the natural world seriously, because we need a natural world. It's essential that we still have access to nature, and the more people that appreciate the natural world, we've got much more chance of protecting it. And I'm lucky enough now to be doing a job where I can do things like this and hopefully spread that word.
Fantastic. And once we're out of this lockdown situation, is there a way that people can join you on walks to go and see pine martens?
Well, I would love to say that we could go for a walk and see a pine marten, but even in Scotland, where there's lots of pine martens, you're just never guaranteed to see them unless they've been habituated to like human feeding stations. So what we tend to do is just go for walks, looking for those field signs, and it's an introduction of like the habitats that the pine martens might be hanging around in, so that people can keep an eye out for them themselves, and to look for some of the field signs and the indicators that you've got pine martens around. And frustratingly, I've had to cancel so many of those because of lockdown. Now is the key time. Now is the best time for pine martens to be spotted, because they're venturing out, feeding up a lot more. But we'll make up for it, I'm sure, next year.
Fingers crossed we will do. A massive thank you, Stuart. It's been great chatting to you and getting a little insight into the world of pine martens. They sound like great animals, and it sounds like you're doing some really great work there. Internationally recognised, ladies and gentlemen. Stuart Edmunds from the Shropshire Wildlife Trust. Thank you so much, Stuart. We'll catch up again soon.
Okay, thank you very much for having me, Patrick.
Nice one. Take care. So that was Stuart Edmunds, and sharing his passion and love for mammals, in particular pine martens. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode today. Next week we've got a whole bunch of new episodes. We're still sorting out who's going to go on first, but there are a couple of videos in the video list, so take a look at that once we're all done here. And also remember, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this channel. It would mean the world to me if you could actually leave a comment about what you enjoyed most. If you enjoyed something, great, let me know. If you didn't, I don't mind. Tell me, and I'll work on improving that and bring some more value and excitement to you guys at home. So yeah, it's Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I will see you on Monday at 11 a.m. We're going to have a new guest, a new topic, and hopefully you'll enjoy it as well. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are too. So until then, take care, and thanks for watching.